What if I told you that the most lethal special operations machine ever assembled by human hands just walked straight into Iran, dismantled one of the most daring rescue situations in the history of modern warfare, and then vanished back into the dark before the morning news even had a headline? And what if I told you that the country it just humiliated had spent 46 years convinced it was immune to exactly this kind of force? That it had looked at America's most elite warriors and decided, quietly and confidently, that they were not a real threat? Before we go any deeper, do me one small favor. Tap that like button, hit subscribe, and share this video with someone who needs to understand what is really happening in the world right now. Because what you are about to hear is the kind of story that surfaces once, gets ignored by the news cycle in 4 days, and then disappears into the silence where history actually lives. Now let us get into it. Somewhere in the mountains of central Iran, in the middle of a shooting war that most of the world had not fully processed yet, American operators pulled off something that should not have been survivable. They built a forward operating base inside enemy territory. They ran deception operations through the CIA that sent Iranian search teams hunting in entirely the wrong direction. They navigated hostile mountain terrain in the dark while Revolutionary Guard units were closing in on their target. And they brought home 2 downed American aircrew alive, not from a friendly nation, not from a neutral buffer zone, from inside Iran itself, deep in the heart of the Islamic Republic, during an active war. To understand how that is even possible, you have to rewind nearly half a century, because the force that just did this was not born from ambition or strategic vision. It was born from something far more powerful. It was born from humiliation, complete, documented, public, unforgettable humiliation. And the country responsible for that humiliation was Iran. The story starts at a place called Desert One, a flat, desolate stretch of Iranian sand about 200 miles southeast of Tehran. It is the night of April 24, 1980. American hostages had been held inside the United States Embassy in Tehran for nearly 6 months. President Jimmy Carter, under enormous political and moral pressure, approved a daring rescue operation called Eagle Claw. 8 large helicopters lifted off from the USS Nimitz. The plan was intricate, fragile, and entirely dependent on dozens of separate moving parts working together in perfect sequence. They never came close. A wall of sand, a haboob, swallowed the helicopters mid-flight. One turned back early. Another suffered a critical hydraulic failure. The mission required at least 6 working aircraft to proceed. They had 5. The mission commander ordered a full abort. That should have been the worst of it. A failed operation, painful, embarrassing, but no American blood spilled. Then came the thing nobody planned for. During the frantic ground refueling in the dark, a helicopter rotor clipped a transport aircraft. Both exploded. The fireball rose into the Iranian night sky. 8 Americans died instantly. Their remains could not be recovered. By sunrise, Iranian forces had arrived at the site. They dragged the burned wreckage in front of cameras. They paraded it on state television. Ayatollah Khomeini stood before his nation and declared that God himself had sent sand into the engines of the great Satan to protect the revolution. It was one of the most visible and devastating military failures in American history. But here is the part that changes everything. That night did not break America. It rebuilt it. When the Holloway Commission tore the operation apart piece by piece, what they found was terrifying in a different way. The enemy had not stopped Eagle Claw. America had stopped itself. The Navy could not communicate with the Army. The Army could not talk to the Air Force. The helicopter pilots were Marines reassigned from sea duty with almost no experience in long-range desert navigation. There was no shared doctrine. There were no shared radios. There was no single commander with full authority over the entire operation. It had been stitched together in a basement by people who did not even agree on basic terminology. The commission identified 23 major failures. 11 of them were rated catastrophic. The conclusion was brutal but honest. The United States military was simply not designed for this kind of war. So the people who ran it made a decision. They tore it down and they built something new. Within months, a new unit was created specifically for the missions everyone else called impossible. They named it SEAL Team 6. Then came Delta Force, expanded, properly funded, and given the resources it needed to operate anywhere on Earth. Then came the Night Stalkers, the special helicopter pilots trained to fly through hell at 50 feet off the ground in total darkness. Then came the Joint Special Operations Command, a single brain capable of controlling all of them simultaneously. Then in 1986, the Goldwater-Nichols Act forced every branch of the United States military to operate as one organism instead of four competing institutions. And in April 1987, almost exactly 7 years after Desert One burned, the United States Special Operations Command was born at MacDill Air Force Base in Tampa. Every single brick of that new machine was laid on top of 8 graves in the Iranian sand. Iran created the weapon, it just did not know it yet. Now fast forward to the early hours of February 28, 2026. The operation is called Epic Fury. It is the largest American military campaign in the Middle East since the invasion of Iraq in 2003. In the first 72 hours, over 1,700 targets are struck across Iran. B-2 stealth bombers, B-1s, B-52s, F-22s, F-35s, A-10s, carrier strike groups, Reaper drones, and long-range precision missile systems all move simultaneously in perfect coordinated sequence. And in the silence behind the visible firepower, every elite unit in the American Special Operations arsenal slides into position. Quiet, patient, ready. The opening strike reportedly killed Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, the man who had ruled the Islamic Republic since 1989. The man whose entire political identity was built around the idea that Iran could and would outlast American power. Gone in the opening wave, Iran's reply came fast and furious. Hundreds of ballistic missiles, thousands of drones launched in every direction across the region. Most never reached their targets. They ran into an American air defense architecture that had been built and refined for exactly this night. But what the public saw on television was only the loud surface of the war. The part that actually mattered was happening in the dark. Approximately 100 Special Operations personnel drawn from SEAL Team 6, Delta Force, Army Rangers, the Night Stalkers, and Air Force Special Tactics teams were already moving inside Iran. Where exactly? How exactly? For what specific purposes? The Pentagon has never fully confirmed. That silence is intentional. But the world got one small crack in that wall, and what came through that crack is what this story is really about. Quick pause right here. If your jaw is already moving, do me a favor and drop the word machine in the comments below. It tells the algorithm this story is worth pushing. And I promise you, what comes next is the part that nobody else is covering. On April 3rd, 2026, an Air National Guard F-15E Strike Eagle flying out of the 494th Fighter Squadron took a catastrophic hit deep inside Iranian airspace over the southern part of the country. Both crew members ejected. They came down somewhere in the rugged mountains of Kogaluye and Boyar Ahmed province. The pilot, through training and instinct, activated his emergency survival beacon almost immediately after hitting the ground. American assets picked up the signal within hours. But here was the problem. He was deep inside enemy territory. Iranian Revolutionary Guard forces were already mobilizing. The regime had put out a standing offer of roughly $60,000 to any Iranian civilian who could locate a downed American aircrew member first. The incentive was real, and the search was moving fast. 7 hours after the aircraft went down, the pilot was recovered and back in American hands. But the second crew member, Major Jessica Anderson, a colonel-ranked weapons officer with years of combat experience across multiple theaters, was still out there, somewhere in those mountains, alone, hunted, and the clock was not stopping for anyone. What happened next is what senior defense analysts are now calling one of the most layered and technically complex rescue operations in the entire history of American special warfare. Not just in the Middle East, in history. Here is what the operation actually looked like on the ground. SEAL Team 6 led the primary rescue effort. Delta Force and Army Rangers were positioned in immediate reserve, ready to push in if the situation deteriorated faster than projected. Overhead, Reaper drones maintained constant surveillance of the terrain and engaged Iranian patrol units whenever they pushed too close to the target area. The Night Stalkers were threading their helicopters through Iranian mountain airspace at altitudes and speeds that border on physically improbable. Air Force Special Tactics teams were sitting at the center of the entire web, coordinating every aircraft, every ground team, every radio transmission in real time. But the single most extraordinary detail of this operation is not the technology. It is not the firepower. It is the audacity. To execute this rescue, the United States did not just operate near Iranian soil. It built a temporary forward operating base on Iranian soil. Delta Force operators located and secured an abandoned agricultural airstrip approximately 14 miles north of the city of Shahrakord in Isfahan province. The strip was roughly 200 feet wide and nearly 4,000 feet long. For 48 consecutive hours, that piece of Iranian land was an American military installation. Aircraft landed on it, personnel staged from it, equipment moved through it, right there, inside the Islamic Republic. While the war was still raging, then the CIA did something that belongs in a different category entirely. Using a classified piece of technology whose details remain sealed at the highest levels, they pinpointed the location of Major Jessica Anderson after she transmitted a short radio burst. 3 words: God is good. That signal was enough. Intelligence analysts and CIA field assets working with cooperative Iranian civilians, individuals who for their own reasons wanted the Americans to succeed, were able to narrow her position to a specific ridgeline in the mountains. But Iranian search teams were already dangerously close. One unit was operating within reach of where Major Anderson was hidden. If they found her first, she would have become the most valuable prisoner of the entire war. A living, breathing leverage point that the regime could use against America on every diplomatic and media stage simultaneously. So the CIA built a lie, a specific, targeted, surgically constructed deception. They seeded false intelligence across Iranian communications networks, suggesting that Major Anderson had already been located and was being quietly extracted via a ground convoy moving through a completely different region of the country. Iranian forces took the bait. Units that had been converging on the real location turned and rushed in the wrong direction. American aircraft then methodically struck any Revolutionary Guard elements that lingered too close to the actual ridgeline where she was waiting. For 48 hours straight, the operation ran without stopping. SEAL Team 6 operators moving through terrain in darkness. CIA assets managing the deception architecture in real time. Night Stalker crews flying through conditions that would have grounded most of the world's aviation. Delta Force positioned and ready at the edge of the trigger. Air Force controllers synchronizing every piece of the machine from the inside out. During the firefights that occurred as American teams extracted Major Anderson and moved her to the secured airstrip, 3 Revolutionary Guard members and 4 Iranian army officers were killed. The price of the operation was also real on the American side. 2 MC-130J transport aircraft were destroyed on the ground to prevent their capture. 4 special operations helicopters were lost. An A-10 Warthog was shot down. 2 Black Hawk helicopters sustained serious damage, but Major Jessica Anderson walked back into American hands, and both airmen came home alive. And a message was delivered to everyone watching. Not just Iran, everyone. Now stop for a second and actually feel the weight of what just happened. The United States entered Iranian airspace during an active war. It established a forward base on Iranian ground. It ran a CIA deception campaign inside the country. It engaged Revolutionary Guard units in direct firefights in Iranian mountains, and it extracted its people, both of them, in 48 hours, while the larger war was still happening around them. Now hold that image in your mind and place it next to the image of burning wreckage on a flat Iranian salt flat in 1980, where America's helicopters could not find each other in the dark, where the Navy and the Army were operating on different radio frequencies, where the entire plan collapsed because of mechanical failures and communication failures that should never have occurred in the first place. The gap between those 2 images is not technology, the gap is design. In 1980, there was no joint command, there was no shared doctrine, there was no single commander with authority over every branch simultaneously. In 2026, SEAL Team 6 and Delta Force and the Night Stalkers and the CIA and Air Force Special Tactics are not 4 separate entities running parallel operations. They are one body with one brain and 46 years of shared muscle memory. And the rescue in the mountains of Isfahan was not a miracle to the people who executed it. It was a Tuesday. But here is where the story becomes something more than history. Because if the machine that just did all of that in 48 hours inside enemy territory can operate at that level, the natural question is not what it just did. The natural question is what it has not done yet. Hold on one moment right here. If this story is landing the way I think it is, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on the notification bell. It costs you nothing. It keeps this channel alive in an environment designed to drown out the stories that actually matter. Because what I am about to tell you next is the part that Washington is debating right now, behind closed doors, in rooms where the cameras do not go. By early March 2026, the President of the United States was reportedly weighing one of the most significant military options in modern American history, the possibility of deploying American Special Operations Forces inside Iran on a mission to locate and secure the country's stockpile of near-weapons-grade enriched uranium. United Nations inspectors had been blocked from the relevant sites for nearly 9 consecutive months. Think about what that actually means. The most dangerous material on the planet, in the hands of the most openly hostile regime toward the United States in the world, and no one outside Iran had confirmed eyes on its exact location in 3/4 of a year. American and Israeli intelligence assessed with high confidence that the bulk of Iran's enriched uranium stockpile remained beneath the Isfahan facility in deep underground tunnels, with smaller quantities at Fordow and Natanz. That assessed with high confidence is not the same as confirmed. And when the subject is material that can erase a city, the difference between assessed and confirmed is not a technicality. It is everything. Here is the part most people do not know. Counter-weapons of mass destruction missions are not a new concept for SOCOM. They are one of its core designed purposes. In 2016, the Department of Defense officially designated the United States Special Operations Command as the lead planning authority for every counter-nuclear, biological, and chemical contingency on Earth. JSOC has previously disrupted nuclear smuggling networks operating across multiple continents. It has developed and maintained detailed contingency plans to secure Pakistan's nuclear arsenal in the event of a sudden regime collapse. The doctrine exists, the training exists, the relationships with the intelligence community are already in place and have been operational for years. What is new in 2026 is the opening. American air power has established dominance over Iranian skies. Iran's integrated air defense network has been systematically degraded over weeks of precision strikes. American forces are already present inside the country in the special operations capacity that just brought Major Anderson home. The window is small, but it is real, and windows do not stay open. The operational concept being discussed by planners goes roughly like this. Marine expeditionary units form the outer security perimeter around the target areas. The 82nd Airborne Division seizes a nearby airfield to establish a reliable air bridge for follow-on forces and for the extraction of any material that is secured. And the special operations element, the quiet professionals who are already moving inside Iran, conducts the actual direct action at the uranium storage sites. No mass invasion, no large conventional footprint. A surgical, precisely sequenced, layered operation executed by the most experienced and capable operators in the history of armed conflict. And the uranium is not the only target generating serious conversation in the buildings where these decisions are made. There is a small island in the Persian Gulf called Karg Island. On March 13, 2026, American aircraft struck more than 90 military installations on and around the island. But what those strikes carefully avoided is more revealing than what they hit. The oil and gas infrastructure, the export terminals, the loading facilities, the pipelines, all of it was deliberately left intact. You do not spend precision ordnance carefully protecting the infrastructure of an asset you intend to destroy. You protect it because you intend to own it. Karg Island processes approximately 90% of all Iranian crude oil exports. Not some, 90%. If the United States takes Karg, Iran does not lose a port. It loses its financial bloodstream. It loses the revenue stream that sustains the Revolutionary Guard's operational capacity, that funds the ballistic missile production facilities, that pays for the drone manufacturing programs, that keeps the proxy forces in Lebanon, Iraq, Yemen, and Syria supplied and operational. Every dollar that powers the regime's resistance economy and its regional influence flows through that island. Remove the island and you do not just degrade Iran's military, you defund it. Defense analysts have begun publicly discussing what a seizure operation might look like in practical terms. Halo jumps from altitude, SEAL delivery vehicles operating beneath the Persian Gulf surface in darkness, maritime infiltration teams emerging from the water at the island's edge in the early hours before dawn, Marine raiders establishing the perimeter and the hold. The island is small. It is exposed. It sits approximately 15 miles off the Iranian mainland. The risk is real and it is significant. But it is precisely the category of risk that these units have spent their entire careers training for, on coastlines from California to Florida, to the Philippines to the South China Sea. By late April, weeks of sustained American strikes had systematically dismantled Iran's command and control infrastructure across the entire region. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Quds Force, the elite external operations arm of the regime that had spent decades building proxy networks and conducting covert operations against American interests worldwide, had been severely degraded. The window was not just theoretically open, it was structurally open in a way it had never been in 46 years. On April 30th, 2026, CENTCOM Commander Admiral Cooper and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs General Dan Kane walked into the Oval Office. They presented the president with a comprehensive briefing on available military options, limited ground operations, precision strikes on Iranian energy infrastructure, counter-nuclear direct action missions, all of it laid out in detail, all of it planned, all of it resourced, all of it ready to execute on a single decision. The machine is built. The machine is fueled. The machine has already proven inside Iranian territory what it is capable of. The only remaining variable is the order. Now take a step back from the operational details and sit with the larger question. The question that almost nobody in mainstream media coverage is willing to actually hold still and examine. How did the United States of America arrive at a point in history where it can conduct a multi-day covert rescue operation inside Iranian territory, strike 1,700 targets in 72 hours, maintain 3 carrier strike groups in the region simultaneously, deploy the 82nd Airborne and the 101st Airborne and the 10th Mountain Division in coordinated fashion, while SEAL Team 6, Delta Force and Army Rangers and the Night Stalkers and Marine Expeditionary Units and entire fleets of electronic warfare and signals intelligence aircraft all move together in one perfectly synchronized rhythm? The answer runs in a direct, painful, unbroken line back to one location: a burning salt flat southeast of Tehran. April 1980, Iran built this machine. Not by choice, not by accident, by humiliation, by breaking America's military so publicly and so completely that the institution had no choice but to tear itself down to the foundation and rebuild from scratch. Every joint command structure, every shared radio protocol, every counter-nuclear contingency plan, every Night Stalker pilot who can thread a helicopter through a mountain valley at 50 feet in total darkness, every SEAL operator who can move through hostile terrain for 48 hours without support, every Delta Force soldier who can secure an airstrip inside enemy territory and hold it long enough for a rescue to execute. All of it was forged in the fire of that night in 1980. All of it was paid for with the humiliation Iran inflicted on America in front of the entire watching world. The Islamic Republic was founded on an idea, a genuinely powerful idea. That faith, revolutionary conviction, and the willingness to accept martyrdom were sufficient to neutralize any military advantage held by a superpower. For 46 years, that story survived because America never brought its full rebuilt weight to bear directly on Iran. There were targeted sanctions, there were proxy confrontations, there were precision strikes like the one that removed Qasem Soleimani in January 2020. But the full weight of what the United States military became after Desert One burned had never landed directly on Iran's soil at full strength. Operation Epic Fury is that landing. And so far, the ideology is not holding up to contact with reality. Iran once told its people that the sandstorm of 1980 was divine intervention, that God had breathed sand into American engines to protect the revolution, that the failure of Eagle Claw was cosmic confirmation that the regime was under divine protection. But what actually happened that night in the desert was not a miracle for Iran. It was the worst gift Iran ever gave to the country it most feared, because that sandstorm did not stop America. It woke America up. Every door SEAL Team 6 has kicked down since that night. Every target Delta Force has neutralized. Every hostage the Night Stalkers have pulled from impossible situations. Osama bin Laden in his Abbottabad compound. Saddam Hussein dragged from a spider hole near Tikrit. Major Jessica Anderson lifted from a mountain ridgeline inside Iran, while Revolutionary Guard search teams were still closing in. All of it traces back to 8 graves in the Iranian desert. All of it is the direct product of the humiliation Iran delivered on the night it believed it had defeated America forever. The country that lit that fire is now standing in front of the furnace it created, and in Washington, the people who command that furnace are sitting around tables looking at maps. Maps of uranium storage tunnels beneath Isfahan, maps of Karg Island and its oil loading terminals, maps of leadership compounds and communications infrastructure, maps of missile storage facilities and drone manufacturing sites, looking at options that make the boldest planning of the Cold War era look restrained by comparison. There is one more thing worth sitting with before we finish: the deep, uncomfortable truth at the center of this entire story. Iran spent 46 years telling its own people that resistance was a form of strength, that the willingness to suffer was a form of victory, that religious conviction would always ultimately defeat technological advantage and military organization. and it built an entire national identity, an entire political legitimacy around that promise. But ideology is not armor. Slogans cannot intercept a B-2 stealth bomber flying at altitude in the dark. Revolutionary speeches cannot prevent a Night Stalker helicopter from landing on a mountaintop at 3 in the morning. And no amount of ideological certainty can reconstitute a command and control architecture after the man at the top has been removed in the opening hour of the war. The regime that spent 46 years calling America the Great Satan lost its supreme leader before the first full day of epic fury was over. The proxy network it had constructed across the region over decades to bleed American power slowly and at distance had already been broken or boxed in. The economy that funded the dream of regional dominance was hanging by a thread attached to one small island in the Persian Gulf, and the operators who could unravel all of it were already inside the country. This is not a story about whether America is right or wrong. This is not a geopolitical argument. This is a story about the simple, hard, mechanical consequence of what happens when a nation humiliates a superpower into completely reinventing itself. You do not get a weaker adversary on the other side of that process. You get a faster one, a quieter one, a more precise one. The kind of adversary that does not announce its arrival, that appears in the dark, that finishes its work before sunrise and leaves evidence only in the silence. Iran created that adversary, and now Iran has to share a world with it. There was an old Cold War contingency plan called Project Honey Badger. It imagined inserting roughly 2,400 special operations personnel into Iran to execute the hostage rescue that Eagle Claw failed to accomplish. That plan was never used, but the engine that produced it, the strategic imagination, and the institutional commitment to never again being caught unprepared, never stopped running. It grew. It evolved. It absorbed every lesson from every operation across 4 decades. And right now, in a building at MacDill Air Force Base in Tampa, Florida, the people who operate that engine are looking at options that make Honey Badger seem simple by comparison. The machine is ready. It has been ready for a long time. It proved it in the mountains of Isfahan when it brought Major Jessica Anderson home. It proved it in the first 72 hours of epic fury when 1,700 targets disappeared simultaneously. The only remaining question is not whether the machine can execute what is being considered. The machine already answered that question. The only question is what comes next. And when you trace the full arc of this story, from the burning wreckage at Desert One in April 1980, through the decades of rebuilding and refining and training and learning, to the impossible rescue that just unfolded in the mountains of Iran in 2026, one conclusion becomes unavoidable. Iran spent 46 years believing it had humiliated America into caution. What it actually did was engineer the most capable special operations force in human history and then pointed at itself. The next move, whenever it comes, will not announce itself. It will not look like a war in the traditional sense. It will look like a series of impossible nights, one following the other, executed with the quiet precision of people who have spent their entire professional lives preparing for exactly this moment, until the regime that lit the original fire finally understands, completely and permanently, the nature of the furnace it created. If this story hit differently for you, if it changed the way you see the connection between 1980 and 2026, if it made the history feel alive and immediate in a way it did not before, do not let it disappear into the algorithm. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, share this video with one person who needs to understand what is actually happening in the world right now, and leave me a comment telling me what you think the next move is. Karg Island, the uranium tunnels beneath Isfahan, a leadership decapitation strike, or something the planners in Tampa have not publicly hinted at yet. I read every comment. The best ones shape the next video, because some stories only surface once, and this is one of them.